All right.
Yeah.
Um, Again, welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our weekly technical council meeting. Today is June 15th already. We're already in the middle of June, believe it or not. Today is going to be dedicated. Today is our biweekly meeting for specifically the standards. So just quick summary, we've had a great set of workshops last week. As the outcome of that for today, we have two standards that ready for reviews. The invocation standard is ready for final review, and we'll go through that. That's for agenda for today. And also URI resolution is ready for the initial review. So we'll spend some majority of our time is going to be spent on that today. We'll start quickly by one of the things that was recommended during our previous meetings is to go over once again some of the qualities and standard categories to make sure that we're aligned on that definition. So we'll start with that. And then we'll just talk a little bit about upcoming workshops and make sure that for this upcoming Friday, we have everything lined up. We made some great progress with serialization standard that was being changed the name to a data translation standard. But we didn't complete that work. We completed the outline during the last workshop and the overview and define the categories and qualities. But now the next workshop is to continue working through the outline and filling that in. And once we complete the work, the serialization is almost complete, but I didn't get a sign off that this is ready to go. So we'll go through that, but we'll also need to work on the serialization and custom types. Um, so we will schedule that workshop too. This is not ready for the initial feedback. This is going to require it for the second workshop to continue. Um, so that's, and then we can talk about what other workshops we want to pick for this Friday. I know that we had also, Joe, a couple of workshops that we wanted to schedule for features. So maybe we can this Friday combine some of these so we can talk about that towards the end of the call. All right, so does that sound good for everyone from the agenda standpoint? Any other items that would like to add and make sure we prioritize for today's discussion?
I'm not sure that URI resolution is ready for initial review. We needed to add the resolver part. That's the takeaway from last workshop.
I apologize. I thought that we said that the initial resolution is ready for the initial review.
It was until we added the until we said that we need to add URI resolvers to this standard.
So
Yeah,
maybe.
could we review what we have right now
Yeah,
without that?
I think that would be beneficial. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's start real quick because I think this is going to take just a few minutes. We wanted to take a look at our labels definition, specifically when it comes to qualities and standard categories. Um, and one of the questions that I wanted to ask is that we definitely wanted to assign qualities and products to the features, but just wanted to confirm, we also want to assign qualities to the standards, or is that an overkill from your perspective? Meaning, when we go through our acceptance criteria for the standard, one of the questions that I ask is define qualities. Is that an appropriate question when it comes to standard or just standard categories?
Yeah, I do think so.
Okay.
Um, yeah, because we want to be able to know what parts of our standard are attributing to the main qualities that we're targeting. And so if we have a standard that really doesn't attribute to any of our qualities, then yeah, maybe we're missing organizational goal,
Okay, so
or
it's a
maybe
level
it,
check.
it just isn't relevant. Yeah.
Makes sense. So, okay, so we definitely have done that for the translation layer, and this is how I'm putting that into the actual format of the standard as it getting get posted right above the, so we have the name of the standard, the version, then the overview section, then the right on top of the overview section, I'm going to put out the qualities, then obviously the overview, and then we can go into the subsections depending on what the outline is. The outline is going to get removed because that's really just, so essentially will show up here on the left-hand side, or it's basically a bunch of links to the sections, which I don't think are necessary because those are small articles, bookmarks, but it's a good thing to keep it initially because that gives us the structure. All right, so let's go back then to the agenda and let's take a look at let's start with the qualities. So we currently have 6: secure, scalable, multi-platform, user-friendly, composable, and upgradable. Do we feel that that captures the list accurately, or is there any other changes, additions that we would like to make to this list? Anything one of
That's
the
what's on our site, so seems good to me.
Yeah, I don't think that we're adding any here.
One of the things that we can do is take a look at the wrapper protocol, because I think we identified some qualities there. So just making sure that, and this is already posted. Yeah, I think that matches, right?
Yep.
What about the standard categories? This is where our current outline of the categories are, and that categories um, list matches the standards directory structure. So when we place the standard into a directory, it's based on these categories that were identified at the user story level. So let's go, maybe let's look at through this and see if there's any adjustments that we'd like to make to this list.
Yeah, based on our conversation recently, could we make some changes to the URI categories? Um, yeah, what do you think, Yuri? Should there just be maybe one URI category, or uh,
I,
do having both of those work?
I think this whole conversation started when we were working on the workshop for the data translation standard, and we realized that the standard categories actually just are standards, not really categories. So, should we have them as categories, or should they be the same standards? I don't think. The thing we found is that there's no benefit of having standard categories just reflect the standards completely.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are there any of these that you imagine we would have multiple standards within, or no?
That's a hard question. So I would guess client, but if it has a standard within it, it might be a separate package, so a separate standard as well. Hmm.
Uh, Okay, all right. Yeah, so maybe we just flatten everything for right now, because I agree. Like I think that the folder structure and yeah, these categories, it's yeah, it's hard to say whether this is the right thing or not, because we're still kind of fleshing out the standards themselves. Um, I think that the route that we've been finding is helpful. Is, writing the ones that make the most sense. So, for example, we started with the wrap standard and the URI standard, And then from there, we've figured out, okay, we need to now define these other kind of like linked standards. And so doing more of like, let's say, like a bottom up approach instead of like a top down approach to figuring out where the different categories are.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd say since we just started and there's like two standards only right now, with only a couple coming in, and we don't have any obvious categories that we would place them into, I'd say we could just remove the categories completely for now. And then once we have a lot of standards, if we see a need to organize things a bit, better categorically, we could add categories. So yeah, bottom up.
Well, I was gonna recommend that we just continue with the process that we have right now and just ask this question, and then just so we can have some level of organization. This is probably a good, just we obviously invested time to put this together, so maybe let's just keep it where it is right now, and then once we start, we will just revisit this every couple of months, right, and see how we're ready to maybe take a look at the structure, and after we have some additional standards completed. And if the answer is yes, then we go through this process again. How does that sound?
okay, yeah, that sounds good.
All right, so that's fine. Let's move off this topic then. Doesn't seem to be the most critical thing right now. So let's go back to um, let's take a look at the invocation standards. And this
Cool.
is ready
And
for our final review, right?
yeah, so a quick note on this, if you scroll to the bottom, there's still some minor to-do sections. And so me and Caesar can kind of talk about what still has to be done there. But there's definitely some things that we can talk about today and get some feedback on. So yeah, maybe we just start kind of maybe Caesar and I can go ahead and walk you guys through it
So
section by section.
let me first of all let me go ahead and send in the notes channel the link to the standard, so everybody can have access to the working note. And then for the notes, you are welcome to either add that directly or add it in comments for the feedback. Okay, so
Okay,
here's the link.
awesome. And yeah, what would people prefer? Would you prefer us walking you through it, or would you like to take your own time to read it yourself?
Maybe we could read it in like 2 minutes, and then you guys could walk us through it.
All right, sure, yeah, yeah. Let's start with reading.
Okay, let's spend 3 minutes and reconvene at 20 after, 20 past the hour. Okay, I think that's a time check. We're ready to go ahead and walk through. Are you guys still reading? How you feel about kicking this review process? Kicking off?
Yeah,
We can start. Go ahead, Raj, please. Sorry.
yeah, I'm still ready. Will take a couple of minutes.
Let's give it a couple more minutes then. Raj, let us know when you're ready.
Yeah, I am done reading.
Awesome. Okay, so I guess just to give the intentions behind each section. In this overview section, the idea was just to talk about the concept of what an invoke is. Um, to also kind of give some higher level context of what you can expect when you invoke something. You can inspect a function to be run, and that function could be in WebAssembly or it could be in a plugin. Next, just basically walking through the input of the invoke function as well as the output. So that's where we have invoke options. I thought that these were pretty self-explanatory here. And then if you scroll down a little bit farther to the invoke result section, um, here we do a little more explaining because this has kind of an intricate detail where one of them is expected to be defined. And also that you can use a null type to represent a intentionally null value. And so a little bit of details there. Then once we describe the input and the output of the client's invoke function, we cover the implementation, just basically stating, very simply what it's doing. It's going to load a wrapper and it's going to invoke it. The loading wrapper process, there's not much to describe here because it really just uses the URI resolution process. And then when we invoke the wrapper, we describe kind of the common rules that are, used in both WebAssembly and plugin wrappers. So, the commonalities are the interface. They all have the same wrapper invocation interface, as well as they all have the concept of supporting the concept of a sub invoke. Um, and so, kind of explaining more of what a sub invoke is. And lastly, we basically just go through each different type. So for WebAssembly wrappers, we describe how the invocation works for WebAssembly. And then for plugin wrappers, we would, do the same. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Caesar, do you have any other added context to add?
Nope, I think you explained it perfect. One thing that I would like to get feedback, it's in the wrapper invoke regarding the soup invoke part. Personally, after talking a lot with Nestor, I think that the sub invoke it's something that gives us like a lot of weight in the game, let's say. So yeah, if you have like better ideas on how we should describe these, and yeah, like make it explicit somehow, would be awesome. But if you think that's right too, like what we have right now, it's okay too, you know. But yeah, I'm just looking to make sure that we get this point when trying to explain the subinvoke stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one quick idea is that currently we have the WebAssembly wrapper section and the plugin wrapper section nested underneath the wrapper invoke section. So they're subsections. Maybe instead we have wrapper invoke as its own section. We have sub invoke as the next section, like as its own, and then underneath that we have WebAssembly wrappers and plugin wrappers as their own independent sections. So um, this would put all of them at the same level, and it would give us space to talk more about sub invocation.
Like that.
Yeah, one question I have is about our use of undefined and null. So yeah, it makes sense because the current client is written in JavaScript, but for other client languages where there is no concept of undefined, because I think most of the language just has concept of null or none or something similar. There is no concept of undefined in many languages. So
Yeah,
how will, yeah.
yeah. I've thought of that. I think it's still important to basically have this concept of null, regardless of what language you're in. Because you want to be able to tell when a wrapper is intentionally returning a null value. And so a simple way to do this, and I've seen other projects do this in other languages, is they just define a constant that is used as null. And you would just check for something being equal to the null constant. So you basically create your own null type.
Yeah, the problem is real, but I think what Niraj is getting at is that the standard here, the description is very JS specific. So the whole section is just for JavaScript.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in case of like Rust, maybe I don't know, but yeah, let's talk about C++. In case of C++, there is nothing like undefined, right? So it will be null, and you may create a concept of your own null, maybe like create a class for that or something, and return it when someone want to explicitly return that. But yeah, this concept, this description here is very JavaScript specific, and that shouldn't be in the standard.
And the common workaround that Jordan mentioned, for example, in C Sharp, I know also there's no undefined, there is null. But personally, I don't think I would invent a type for null. I would just check if the error is null. If it is, then you can treat the data as like take it as face value, basically. That's the most common thing I've seen in C Sharp,
Yeah,
for example.
yeah, I agree. Like many languages that doesn't have concept of undefined just do things like this.
Yeah, so maybe the only thing that we need to do is change that part in the explanation and say that maybe um, the correct non-JS specific way to go is simply check if the error is something or if it's not. And if there is an error, then you will automatically have no data.
Yeah, but also the standard shouldn't be talking about explicit programming languages, if that makes sense, right?
It
Yeah,
that's exactly the sorry. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I think that we can just simplify the whole thing. So we can just basically remove this concept of undefined or and null. And we can just say that if if error has an error, then the invocation failed. Otherwise, data is the return result. And it could be truthy or falsy.
Okay. So basically, we can say something like, if like the invocation fails, error must be defined. And yeah, if otherwise, if it's successful, data must be defined. Like not get into this like null or defined or undefined. Sorry.
Actually,
Yeah.
if the invocation is successful, you wouldn't say that data is necessarily defined. You will say that error is undefined because the undefined concept, as Niraj was saying, only pertains to JavaScript.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe just explaining it kind of, because this essentially is like a union type. So it's either data or it's error. Maybe we could not focus on languages and just say this returns maybe a union type of data and error, and say if error is not defined, data is defined.
Okay. Yep. That sounds good.
So I was just gonna ask if we also update the feedback notes or and continue entering those.
Yeah. Do you want me to add those really quick?
Yeah, or I can also continue
Yeah.
typing.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure
Let
I
me do
don't
it.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
Okay.
What does create wasm instance specifically do?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Create wasm instance. What does it specifically do?
Yeah. It basically you have to instantiate an instance of a WebAssembly module. So it basically creates like a new virtual machine, which then you can call functions on.
And if I'm not mistaken, the fact that we don't use the standard creator but our own constructor function is because we wrap the the vanilla instance into an asyncify configured instance, right?
Yep. Yeah. That's yeah. I was thinking that that would just be covered in the WASM runtime section. Um, yeah. What do you think about just covering all of the asyncify stuff there?
I mean, yeah, I don't think that it should be in this standard. Just wanted to answer Jerry's question.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay. Cool. Any other thoughts, concerns, feedback?
I mean, I would kind of either link to other standards or have a quick explanation of the three methods here. So load wasm, create wasm instance, and sanitize and load DNV. Because it's kind of assumed that the reader knows what we're talking about here, but doesn't necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can tell the reader what standards are being used for each function. So that way, if they want to learn more about what's happening, they can check out the standard.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
For each function or each section, you said. Specify what standards are being
Uh,
used.
yeah, for each function, I guess. Yeah.
By the
We'll
way,
yeah.
sorry,
hmm
finish.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say we'll try to find like a clever way to make it look nice. Yeah.
Cool. That's a good point, and I didn't saw this, but in sanitize and load env, we are passing as a second parameter env, which it's, I mean, probably is processed at env. I don't know, but we should somehow explicitly mention what that is.
Yeah,
If that's
that's a good point. We don't cover that concept anywhere else. Like farther up. Um, hmm. And so
But is the env like? I mean, I don't see how it directly pertains to the invocation standard. Maybe it's more of a WASM runtime standard or client standard, maybe.
Yeah, we actually have it listed in the related standards section right there on the screen. It says module environments. Um, and yeah, like this would get set when you create the client. And so you don't pass it in when you do the invocation. And so I don't know if we necessarily need to cover that here.
I mean, it does feel weird that we're mentioning the env variable, but it's defined. It's not defined in the whole code block.
Okay, got it. So
And
maybe
since
maybe switching that to say
sorry,
this dot env, and instead of referencing it as like a local value, reference it as a class property like this dot env.
yeah, maybe something like that.
Okay, got it.
I could see it being a pretty big source of confusion, even with just this. I mean, Caesar did mention that it's probably using process env, but it's not. It's using the modular environment, it's a whole other concept. So if it's not obvious from this, yeah.
Okay, so maybe add a comment above it. Yeah.
Or what about we explicitly say in this document? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here that when it comes to invocation, you like are able to like interact with some variables with like these environment variables which are configured through the client. Right. So yeah, I don't know. I think that probably this is not the most important part of invocation, but it's also good to know that in the invocation I have some environments available for me if I want to invoke a model. Right. Like this model will. I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that is a good point. To basically specify that if the environment doesn't exist and the module expects it, it'll fail like right at that step. Um, and it won't even get to calling the function. Yeah.
Cool. Does someone else has any other feedback, idea, comment?
Sounds like we're good with this one for now, right, Jordan? I guess my question to you right now is, would you like to schedule a follow-up workshop, or do you feel that the takeaways from this meeting are minor, where it can be done in sort of asynchronous mode?
Yeah, so I think that me and Caesar should definitely meet up to finish this out soon. 'Cause yeah, we're pretty busy working on the release right now. But I think that if we just had like one more hour session, we could definitely do that.
Sure. Maybe we can do it this
Um,
Friday then.
sure, yeah. Caesar, would you be available?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll definitely organize that for. Um,
I got a final piece of feedback. Could you scroll to the give me a second, to the load wrapper section? So even before that, above it, just the client invoke. So we say that we're loading wrappers, so load wrapper and then invoke. And below in load wrapper section, we say the loading of the wrapper is done by the URI resolution process, which must return the client to the client an instance of wrapper. So technically, the URI resolution process could just return a URI if it couldn't find a wrapper, and that's perfectly acceptable for the resolve URI method. but the load wrapper breaks or throws an error if it cannot resolve to a wrapper. So there's a distinction. So with resolve URI, we do not throw any kind of error. We return that error. But with load wrapper in the client, we actually throw an error. So invoke, if it cannot resolve URI, it will throw. But your resolution process will not throw.
Okay, that's a useful distinction. Yeah, I'll make a note of that and make sure, because this is how the client currently works, right? It
Yep.
it does that error handling.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the invoke function calls a load WebAssembly or whatever function, which calls resolve URI, and if the return doesn't contain an API or a wrapper, it throws that error. So it throws the error that it was returned. So resolve URI is a safe function to call, but load wrapper is not,
Okay.
and it's on purpose, of course.
Got it. So I guess like the next question is, should we specify in the standard that errors are thrown and not returned? Or I don't know. Yeah, I guess that doesn't matter. Like it's up to the programming language to implement the best type of error handling that it uses. And then we can just specify that the errors are handled and returned back to the caller of invoke, either through a thrown exception or something else.
Yeah, I don't think we need to do much on error handling or specify how that's handled. Just
Yeah,
I only had the problem with the loading wrappers part where it kind of is incorrect because it says something that your resolution process does not do.
got it. Okay, sounds good.
Hey, I have an ignorant question, but I will do it. Um, the URI resolver can return URI, which is fine, but the URI resolution also can return an URI. I thought that it will always return or error or a wrapper. Does that make sense?
No, no. So an error is only if it fails by some, either a bug or some inside error, so runtime error. But
Mm.
the actual, working case path is it returns either URI or a wrapper. So kind of like the invoke returns either data or an error. This returns a URI or a wrapper. So if you, for
Okay.
example, called it on, let's say, an ENS URI and it didn't redirect to an IPFS URI, you would just get back that same ENS URI.
Cool. Okay.
It's kind of like asking, and just to fully clarify, it's kind of like asking the client to resolve a URI as far as it can. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you for the explanation.
All right, I think we're in a good stopping point if everyone agrees. We'll schedule a follow-up, a workshop, and then we'll have this updates made and schedule it for another round of final review. Um, Going back to our agenda real quick. Um, Given the fact that we have 15 minutes, I think we can go ahead and do a quick review of the URI resolution, just kind of get some initial feedback, and then just 3 minutes at the end or 5 minutes at the end to go through the planning for this Friday. And we already have a couple of this one session scheduled with Caesar and Jordan. So UI resolution, let me go ahead and post that real quick in our private meeting notes channel. Here's the link to this note. And maybe let's take 5 minutes to read through it and then we can start the conversation, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
A quick time check. Guys, you need a little bit more time. Are we good to start discussion?
I need maybe like 3 or 4 more minutes.
Yep. Let me know, guys, when you guys ready to start the discussion.
Is anyone still reading?
I think
I
let's
guess that's a no.
yeah, let's go ahead and start discussion then.
Okay, should I go over?
Yes, please.
Yeah, and just FYI, we have like 6 minutes left.
Okay, I'll go fast. So, first we start off saying what URI resolution even is, which by now we all know. Which requires some prior knowledge for the wrap URI standard. And then we start talking about how the resolution happens. So it's in the client in the resolve URI method. The goal of URI resolution is to resolve an origin URI and return a wrapper and its wrap URI. We also mentioned that if the wrap URI cannot be fully resolved, then we just return the last redirected URI found. and also we return the URI history as a byproduct of that resolution. And if at any point an error is found, we return that error, and we also return the URI history. So we have a method signature here. It takes a wrapper's URI and some optional resolution options, which contain a no cache read, no cache write, and full history. No cache read means that we do not use the cache to resolve this URI, and no cache write means that we do not save the results of the URI resolution process to cache, so we don't update the cache. I should add a comment here for what full history means, so that's a self-feedback I'm adding. So basically, full history, if this is false or undefined, it means that we're just returning the resolvers, the URI resolvers that were used as redirects in this process of resolution. But if the full history is set to true, then we return the history of all of the resolvers that participated in this process. Can you scroll down a bit? Thank you. So the result of URI resolution, it's a wrapper. It's optional because we could not sometimes not resolve into a wrapper. There's the URI, which is what Caesar has been asking. So it's required. So we always return the last redirected URI found. So even if it's just the original URI that the resolution process started at. We return the history, which is also required or not optional. It's always defined. It's the resolution history. It's toggled by the full history option. And we can return an error if an error is found. We also mentioned what the stack is for the history. Do I actually? The stack is an ordered list of objects which describe the resolution process per resolver. Yeah, I think this is referring to the URI resolution history, and I should update that to reflect that. I think this was a mess up from updating the standard last time. Continuing URI resolution step, we define what a step is in the history, so it uses the name of the resolver, the source URI, and result, which is the result that the URI resolver returned, but simplified, so just the URI and whether or not it returned the wrapper. And then we talk about the process of URI resolution, the algorithm specifically, what it returns. So not what it returns, sorry. We mentioned that the Polywrap client needs a configured list of URI resolvers, and we should remove the to-do part and the link because the URI resolvers will now be a part of the standard. We mentioned that we're going through the list of all of the resolvers and what their resolution result is and how we handle each of the 4 cases that can happen when we use the resolvers for resolution. And down below is the pseudocode. So I went through this on the workshop, but
All right. Considering that we are at our time, what I would suggest is that any feedback, obviously there was a great walkthrough and read through, so any feedback that you might have, please enter it to this note asynchronously after this meeting, and I will go ahead and schedule, if everyone is okay with it, the follow-up workshop session. Yuri, if this works for you for this Friday as well, and the rest of the...
are we doing standard workshops in the same week we do the standard council?
Well, I think, I don't know if we've created any kind of dependency between the workshops and the meetings, the council meetings. Let me talk to Joe offline, and I know that he wanted to schedule some feature workshops as well. So maybe we'll try to organize it where you know, this one can happen the following, for example.
I thought last time we defined that each week. So if there's a standards meeting, council meeting, then that Friday is the features workshop and vice versa. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I thought that's what we had discussed.
Okay, then all of this is going to be for the following week. Then Joe, we can coordinate. That's fine.
Okay. Okay.
So for this week,
That's
for this week
provided
we'll
that
have
we have the
features,
features. Yeah.
and then we can schedule the standards the following week. Okay. I think that pretty much concludes. So please go ahead and enter feedback asynchronously, but I'll also schedule a transfer for the next week. Not for the next week, but for the following week, uh, the the review of the feedback as well. Okay. All right. I think
Sounds good.
that pretty much concludes. I know that we're at time and folks needs to drop off, so I think that pretty much concludes our today's meeting. Thank you everyone for participation and your input. This was very productive.
Amazing. Later, guys. God
Thanks,
bless.
guys. God bless.
I'd see.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Eugene.